Hawaii has a moderately regulated breaking lease framework shaped by the state's unique housing dynamics, one of the most expensive and supply-constrained markets in the country, along with specific statutory provisions and a legal culture that balances tenant and landlord interests. The governing law is found in the Hawaii Residential Landlord Tenant Code, Hawaii Revised Statutes Chapter 521, which provides a statutory framework for handling early terminations. If you're a landlord or tenant in Hawaii, the combination of statutory requirements and the extreme market conditions create a breaking lease environment unlike anywhere else. Let's start with the landlord's duty to mitigate damages. Under Hawaii Revised Statutes Section 521-70, when a tenant abandons the property or breaks the lease, the landlord has a statutory duty to make reasonable efforts to re-rent the unit. Hawaii's mitigation requirement is codified. The landlord cannot leave the unit vacant and hold the departing tenant liable for the full remaining rent without making genuine re-rental efforts. The landlord must take reasonable steps, advertising, showing the property, and accepting a qualified applicant. The departing tenant's liability is limited to rent during the vacancy period, plus reasonable re-rental costs. If the landlord fails to mitigate, the departing tenant's liability is reduced. Hawaii's extremely tight rental market means that mitigation often results in quick re-rental, particularly on Oahu. When a tenant breaks a lease in Honolulu or the surrounding communities, the landlord can often find a replacement tenant within 2 to 4 weeks, and sometimes faster. The departing tenant's financial exposure is typically limited in Hawaii's high-demand market. Early termination clauses are generally enforceable in Hawaii if they are reasonable. Hawaii's Consumer Protection Framework, HRS Chapter 480, provides a basis for challenging fees that are unfair or deceptive. An early termination fee that grossly exceeds the landlord's actual or reasonably anticipated damages could be challenged. A fee of 1 to 2 months' rent with reasonable notice is typical, though given Hawaii's high rents, even 1 month's fee represents a substantial dollar amount. Hawaii's Residential Landlord Tenant Code includes provisions regarding prohibited lease terms. Under Section 521-36, certain lease provisions that waive tenant rights under the code are void and unenforceable. A provision that eliminates the landlord's mitigation duty or that imposes the full remaining rent as liquidated damages without mitigation could be challenged under this section. Military members have the right to break a lease under the SCRA, and this is enormously important in Hawaii because the military population represents one of the largest segments of the rental market. Pearl Harbor-Hickam Joint Base, Schofield Barracks, Marine Corps Base Hawaii at Kaneohe Bay, Fort Shafter, Tripler Army Medical Center, and numerous other installations make Hawaii one of the most military-dense states in the country. SCRA lease terminations are an everyday occurrence across Oahu. Military families rotate through Hawaii on 2 to 3 year assignments, and every rotation cycle generates a wave of lease terminations. Active duty service members with qualifying orders can terminate by providing written notice and a copy of the orders. The lease terminates 30 days after the next rent due date. No early termination fee or penalty applies. Hawaii landlords who serve the military market should have SCRA processing as an absolute core competency. Military families communicate extensively. A reputation for smooth, fair SCRA processing generates referrals from departing service members to incoming ones. Conversely, a reputation for fighting SCRA terminations or withholding deposits damages your ability to attract military tenants. BAH rates in Hawaii are among the highest in the nation, reflecting the extreme cost of housing. Military BAH drives pricing for a massive segment of the rental market. When a military tenant terminates under the SCRA, the landlord loses a tenant paying BAH-driven rent, but the constant influx of incoming military personnel typically means the unit can be re-rented quickly to another military family at the current BAH rate. Hawaii has enacted protections for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault that allow early lease termination. Under HRS Section 521-80, a tenant who is a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault can terminate the lease by providing written notice and documentation to the landlord. The qualifying documentation can include a copy of a temporary restraining order or protective order, a police report, or a written statement from a qualified domestic violence or sexual assault service provider. The tenant must provide written notice. The statute specifies the requirements. When a domestic violence victim terminates under this provision, the tenant is responsible for rent through the termination date, but is not liable for the remaining lease term. The landlord cannot charge an early termination fee. The security deposit must be returned according to standard rules, within 14 days. Hawaii's provision includes confidentiality protections. The landlord must keep the documentation private and cannot disclose the tenant's status. The landlord cannot use the termination as a basis for negative references. Tenants in Hawaii may break a lease if the landlord fails to maintain habitable conditions. Under HRS Section 521-42, the landlord has a duty to maintain the premises in a condition fit for habitation, including compliance with building and housing codes, maintenance of structural integrity and essential systems, and provision of running water, hot water, and adequate heating where applicable. If the landlord fails to maintain the property and the failure materially affects health and safety, the tenant has remedies under Section 521-63. The tenant must provide written notice identifying the deficiency. If the landlord fails to remedy the condition within a reasonable time, typically 20 days for non-emergency conditions, the tenant may terminate the lease. Hawaii's climate creates specific habitability concerns different from mainland states. Mold is a persistent issue in Hawaii's humid environment, particularly in older buildings without adequate ventilation. Pest infestations, including termites, cockroaches, and rodents, are common concerns. Water intrusion from heavy tropical rain can damage units quickly. These conditions can constitute habitability violations that support lease termination if the landlord fails to address them. Hawaii also recognizes constructive eviction. If the landlord's failure to maintain the property or affirmative actions render the unit uninhabitable, the tenant can treat the lease as terminated. The tenant must vacate within a reasonable time. Hurricane and natural disaster risk affects Hawaii's breaking lease framework. While major hurricane strikes on Hawaii are less frequent than in the Gulf Coast or Atlantic states, the islands are vulnerable to hurricanes, tropical storms, tsunamis, volcanic activity on the Big Island, and flooding. When a natural disaster damages a rental to the point of uninhabitability, the lease obligation may be suspended or terminated, consistent with general contract principles regarding impossibility of performance. The Lahaina wildfire on Maui in 2023 devastated the community and destroyed massive amounts of housing stock. Tenants displaced by the fire and landlords whose properties were destroyed faced immediate lease termination by operation of law. The disaster created ongoing challenges as displaced tenants sought housing in an already tight Maui market. Landlords on all Hawaiian islands should have disaster contingency plans that address the lease implications of catastrophic events. From a practical standpoint, Hawaii has one of the most unique and challenging rental markets in the country. Oahu, specifically Honolulu and the surrounding communities, contains the vast majority of Hawaii's rental activity. The market is driven by military, federal government, tourism, healthcare, and higher education. When a tenant breaks a lease on Oahu, re-rental is typically quick, 2 to 4 weeks for most units, and often faster for units priced near military BAH rates. The departing tenant's financial exposure is usually limited. Waikiki and urban Honolulu have the highest rents. The North Shore, Windward Side, Kailua, Kaneohe, and Leeward Side, Kapolei, Eva Beach, have varying price points. Kapolei and Eva Beach have seen significant development and growing demand. The military market on Oahu is enormous. When a military tenant breaks a lease, almost always via SCRA, the landlord's primary concern is re-renting to the next military family. The constant rotation means there's always a pool of incoming military families looking for housing. Pricing the unit at or near the current BAH rate for the appropriate rank and dependency status ensures quick absorption. Maui's market has been fundamentally altered by the Lahaina wildfire. The destruction of housing stock and displacement of residents created an acute crisis. Landlords on Maui must be sensitive to fire-displaced tenants. Lease breaks attributable to the disaster are involuntary and beyond anyone's control. The Big Island, Hilo and Kona, has a more affordable market by Hawaii standards. Kauai has a tight, tourist-driven market. Screening replacement tenants in Hawaii involves practical challenges. Reference verification for applicants relocating from the mainland requires accommodation for time zone differences. Hawaii is 2 to 3 hours behind Pacific time. Many replacement tenants, particularly military, are relocating from the mainland and may not be available for in-person viewings. One best practice for Hawaii landlords: calibrate your early termination fee to Hawaii's market reality. The extremely tight market means you can typically re-rent quickly, which undermines the justification for a large fee. A fee of 1 month's rent with 30 days' notice is often appropriate. A 2-month fee in a market where you re-rent in 2 weeks may not withstand challenge. Another best practice, for landlords serving the military market, have an absolutely streamlined SCRA process. Verify orders, accept notice, calculate the 30-day termination date, process the deposit return within 14 days, and document everything. Military families are your bread and butter in Hawaii. Treating SCRA terminations as adversarial events rather than routine business damages your reputation and your occupancy rates. A third best practice: maintain adequate insurance, including wind, flood, and fire coverage, and have a disaster plan that addresses lease implications. Hawaii's vulnerability to natural disasters means that force majeure lease terminations are a real possibility. Being prepared, with both insurance and procedures, protects your financial interests and enables you to communicate clearly with tenants when events occur. Hawaii limits the security deposit to 1 month's rent. The deposit must be returned within 14 days of the tenant vacating. If the landlord fails to return the deposit within 14 days, the landlord may be liable for up to 3 times the amount wrongfully withheld, plus attorney's fees. These strict rules apply to broken leases and normal move-outs alike. The 14-day clock starts when the tenant vacates. For the complete guide to Hawaii breaking lease laws, visit tenantscreeningbackgroundcheck.com. Subscribe to our channel for every state in our Breaking Lease Law series.